Hello readers, I'm Amy and I'm your nonfiction feminist, and today I am joined by Christopher Ruiz, author of the debut work, The Wishing Well, Volume 1. Hello, Christopher.
Hello, and hello to you all.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about the book and when it's releasing?
Yeah, so it is actually releasing this upcoming Sunday, the 26th. We're doing a book launch party at a bar downtown in Springfield, Illinois. I'm very excited. The book itself has been a work in progress for years. I think some of the stories in there are as old as 2012, possibly even a little older. At least older, maybe at its most basic ideas, but some of those have had some ink on the page since 2012 at least. So it's been a long time coming. The work is a collection of 9 short stories. These are horror stories, and they have a variety of subgenres. But I'll let you get into your questions first, I guess, before we get any further about the book.
Well, to start us off, I would really love it if you would tell our audience a little bit about the story of your red dictionary. That's been a fun one to talk with friends about.
Yeah, so when I was a kid, I was a book nerd. I guess I've been a book nerd all my life. My mother read me books in childhood when I was unable to read them myself, and I've been fascinated by them ever since. And I was so enamored by literature and the craft of writing and storytelling, among other things, that while my brother was out making friends, having sleepovers and doing parties and such, I would be at home reading, writing, being isolated, right? I mean, reading and writing, it is a very isolative action, right? It's an isolative hobby. Well, my mother, always the supportive person, had bought me a little writing and reading desk. And for a birthday present once, she bought me a very large, thick, red dictionary, which was a favorite gift of mine. And I had that thing open on that desk. Pretty much any time I was reading or writing, I would find words I didn't know. And I must have been an insufferable child, but I would find these words that I had no idea what they meant. And I would look them up in the dictionary. And then I would force those words into conversation for like the next week, trying to just find a way to, it could have been a word like particulate. And my mother might be vacuuming the house, and I would say, "Oh, picking up all the particulates off the carpet, are we?" You know, things like that. Just goofy child, but always fascinated by the written word.
What is the first book that you ever remember falling in love with?
I think the one that I would have fell in love with earliest may have been The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I was a big Wells kid. I imagine a lot of book nerds and those that get into sci-fi and fantasy and all that, you're either in the Asimov camp or or Tolkien or Verne. For me, it was always Wells. I ate them up. I started with The War of the Worlds, and I couldn't get enough. The Country of the Blind, I recently did a review about on my blog. That's a story that always stuck with me that I read in childhood. I mean, he's got just a fantastic list. Of course, the Time Machine and The Island of Dr. Moreau. Books that really, I think, it was more the language and maybe the era of the literature that stuck with me the most, and it made a very big impression on me. And so I did get into some other authors in that realm, but the next book then after that I had that made a significant impact on me, an emotional impact, and one really on my thinking and perception of life in general, would have been 1984. And so 1984 I read, I believe, in the 7th grade, and I think that was the first time I had read a book where I had actually been staying up until probably 3 or 4 in the morning on a school night and getting maybe only 2 or 3 hours of sleep before having to go to school.
And yet you were still a straight A student.
I was. But 1984, yeah, that's the first time I'd ever done that. And then I had not done that again until probably the next year. I think it was the 8th grade when I started reading Stephen King's The Dark Tower series. And so that was probably the only other set of books that I'd ever sacrificed sleep for.
What is the first story that you ever remember writing?
The first story I ever remember writing, I had a series of little shorts that I even did some terrible illustrations for, about a mouse in a house that was trying to secure cheese by any means necessary, getting into the fridge if it could, and creating these elaborate engineering structures and things so that he could try and reach the countertop or get into the fridge and secure a piece of cheese. And I did end that series, so it does have a conclusion. Of course, the work has been long since rested in the trash, but the final, I believe the final word, the ending word for this whole series was success, with an exclamation point, because it was indeed an exclamation and not a simple statement of fact.
Sounds like you've always been writing about desire and want.
That is a very inherently human thing, right? We have our needs and we have our wants, and a lot of our behavior in life, a lot of the things that we think about, and a lot of the things that we do, really is more just a focus on our individual needs, getting our needs met.
What subgenre do you think you would shelve this book in?
So obviously this is a work of fiction. It is horror, but it being a collection of 9 stories, I did intentionally write each one of these stories with a different subgenre, I suppose, in mind, or just a different feeling or atmosphere. So it is a mix of subgenres. We have psychological horror, maybe even a little bit of slow burn psychological to start out. There's fever dreams in there. We have supernatural. There's creature features. There's some religious horror. I mean, it's a mixed bag for sure. I wanted to make sure that there's a little bit of something in there for everyone. Horror is it's a big umbrella, and there's a lot under that umbrella. I suppose, gosh, as far as subgenres go, I would probably say psychological horror. This is all told in first person narrative, and there's some unreliable narrator. There's some hallucinatory aspects, but it's psychological horror, I think, would probably be the best broad term for it.
We discussed this a little bit before the interview. There was a question from one of your audience members of how scary is the book? Would you rate it 1 to 10? And you discussed that you didn't necessarily like the idea of a 1 to 10 rating because of differences in fear. So how scary would you say this book is?
Yeah, that is a tough one, right? Obviously fear is subjective. We all have our individual phobias. We have our individual fears. There was a biography that I had recently read on Beethoven. And I know I brought this up before with you, but in that biography there is this reflection on art in general and the nature of art. And it was discussing how one of the greatest facets of art is the individuality and the responses to it, right? So I think that's one of the great things about horror, and why all these subgenres we were just talking about exist. Everybody has a different taste. It's human nature, right? We all, that's individuality. And so as far as how scary this book is, I imagine it would be better to discuss the types of fears that each one of these stories might present for someone. Maybe for a father or a mother, to see some of the horrors that involve children in this story, in a couple of these stories. it's possible that might be more fear-inducing for them than for others. There are some stories involve spiders, so an arachnophobe might have some difficulties with at least a couple of the stories in this, right? Other people, maybe they struggle with bathyphobia or with this fear of depths or the unknown. I think thalassophobia is the other one.
Mm-hmm.
The fear of deep oceans and bodies of water. I have a story in here titled "The Lake," which does focus a lot on people floating in water and the absence of things beneath them.
You consulted me a lot for that one.
For sure.
And I remember in auditions for the audiobook that is in the works, you had a lot of auditions commenting on how they're going to try to avoid the spiders in their house for a little bit after reading your audition.
Yes, yep. So I did recently host, I shouldn't say host, I had recently put up the book, a script, just 3 pages, the last 3 pages of The Substitute, which is the second story in this collection. And in that script, I had a creature feature aspect to it. It was also a bit of a fever dream. And so I had a lot of people who were auditioning. I believe I had a little over 80 auditions for this piece, and which was just heartbreaking to work through because there were so many talented audio producers and narrators. They were excellent. They did some excellent work, and it was just horrible for me to send out rejection notes. I hated it, but I loved the work that some of these people did, and yes, I did receive a lot of messages from people telling me they felt the aspects of that story were both unique and pretty scary for them, especially those that had issues with spiders.
It's a very cool experience, I'm sure, to have your work read aloud in different voices like that.
Yes.
Who would you consider, if there's one person or if there's many people, who would you consider your literary inspiration when writing this novel?
Well, that's also a bit of a tough one. So I don't have any one inspiration, and I believe people probably have a lot of writers have a lot of questions regarding what inspires them to write or very specific stories. And I would say that we as artists, writers, painters, really anyone involved in art, filmmaking, and all that, we're chameleons. And so by that I mean our true colors don't really show until we've exposed ourselves to that external stimuli, the content that we consume, the movies we watch, the music we listen to, the people we surround ourselves with. Some of that is in our control and some is not. But for me, I mean, pretty much everything I've read, everything I've watched, my life experiences as a child, my life experiences in the Army, in my tour overseas, in the time that I've spent working at an adolescent psychiatric treatment facility. All these things have had an impact on my writing for sure. I suppose if I was going to say any one person specifically as an inspiration for this work, let's go with Stephen King. He has so many novels and films and short stories that are out there. It's hard not to draw parallels in a lot of modern horror to Stephen King and his work. In The Captive, you're going to see probably some parallels to The Shining, for sure. In The Lake, you'll see parallels to his short story The Raft, which I believe is in Skeleton Crew, the collection.
You could say it's almost impossible to take part in horror without either directly or indirectly interacting with the king of horror in some way or another.
For sure. And the overall theme of The Wishing Well, I mean, we're looking at ill-fated wishes. We are looking at wants and needs, and of course we can't explore that kind of monkey's paw Faustian style without considering needful things, right? Mm-hmm. It's tough, but I'm really hopeful. I feel that I've brought something very unique to what have otherwise been some common tropes in horror. I think I've got some good, unique spins, some fresh takes on common tropes.
Dimitri would like to take part in this interview. Going back into theming and kind of life experiences, everyone say hello to Dimitri as he takes part in this question. Children are frequent characters in these stories. Why did you decide to make that a recurring focus?
So I think there's children, even if only briefly appearing. I believe there are children in 4 of the stories. I might be off on that.
On base.
But in a collection of 9, yes, I suppose that is that is a recurring theme and focus. I would say that because a lot of this work is semi-autobiographical, and I had so many fear-inducing experiences in childhood from which I am writing. That's probably why there's a lot of focus on children. I had, throughout a lot of my childhood, I had struggled with sleep paralysis, with these horrible nightmares, these sleep terrors and such, and they did inspire a lot of this writing. In fact, if I'm hunting for inspiration, sometimes even still when I have nightmares, I will wake up and write down in the middle of the night what I can recall from the nightmare. And then when I'm fully awake in the morning, I can look at my writing and realize that I'm an idiot. How in the world? It doesn't make any sense. Yeah, and then I ran outside in my flip-flops and it was raining frogs. It just, yeah, how can you navigate a flood of frogs in flip-flops? I don't know.
What is your favorite passage or scene from this book?
Well, I suppose after listening to the audiobook script, the auditions for the audiobook, probably the last few pages of The Substitute then. I mean, I just heard it over and over from so many wonderful narrators, really amazing stuff, and it grew on me as probably my favorite.
It has been marked as a favorite story of a lot of your beta readers.
Yeah, so far it seems to be the popular one. It is the more unique story, and now I'm very excited to see how well received it is by the community.
And as far as stories that you were writing, which stories did you find yourself coming back to the most, either in your head or on paper, and which stories were the most difficult to write, and why?
Yeah, I suppose they'd be the same stories for each of those questions there. The audio files was probably the most difficult for me. It went through so many rewrites. I was never happy with it. Truth be told, I'm still not entirely happy with it, but a story is never going to be perfect. It just it was a tough one for me. It focused on some really big things, and it's hard to contain big, and so you either write too much or you don't write enough. Mm-hmm. You don't write enough, and you can't really give your audience the opportunity to grasp how large some concepts can be, at least the concepts you're trying to write about. And in this book, in this story, specifically the audio files, there's, again, another aspect of semi-autobiographical storytelling. And here we have a character who is really struggling with who they want to be in life, why they enlisted into the military, and is it enough? They want to be a part of something big. They want to be a part of something larger than themselves. They want to feel like they have some kind of value or importance in life, and it's just not doing it for them. Wearing this uniform is that's just not it. And it's hard. For me, it was hard to get that across in a way that I feel like people who have never worn the uniform can comprehend.
Which stories were easiest to write and why?
The easiest stories to write. Let's see. Probably the easiest one for me. That would have been probably the Spectator. I think just because of how much of that is a reflection of my own experiences.
It was definitely a favorite of mine.
Yeah. So I'm glad to hear that. The Spectator. Maybe not emotionally easy to write, but
I can see that.
It was certainly a quick write for me, and one that I felt just kind of naturally flowed onto the page. That story told itself more than I told it.
Coming out and saying, "Hey, this is my first rough draft. If you hate it, it's fine." And I read through it and I said it was my favorite. It was interesting to see that the closer we got to a deadline, and the quicker you had to roll these out, there was no decline in quality from you. You were excellent at writing these the whole way through.
I thank you. Yeah, and for the viewers, for the readers, we did bump up the original deadline by more than 2 months. So
it didn't make sense to release the book around Christmas, I think.
To say that maybe some aspects of this production were a little rushed would be a bit of an understatement. But that has zero impact on the writing. I did ensure that every tale is told in the quality that I would want to see as a reader. I would never do that kind of disservice to either the reading community or myself to publish something that just isn't ready.
As a writer, in trying to figure out each of these stories and order them and everything, how do you know when a story is done?
That's tough, because as a writer, you don't believe any of your stories are ever actually done. There's always some editing that can be done. There's always some line that can be revisited and rewritten. I'm going to be in the shower probably 2 or 3 weeks from now, after the book has already been released, and think, oh my God, why didn't I put that in this story, or why did I write it this way? This line would have been so much better. And I think that's probably something that every writer goes through. It's got to be.
Yeah. So, as this is a debut work, your fans will not be able to read more of your work just yet. What or who do you recommend they read next? In other words, do you recommend any books or movies that are similar to the Wishing Well's themes or storytelling style?
Other works that might be similar to the Wishing Well. We discussed Stephen King's Needful Things. Certainly, that would be a work to explore, similar to the Wishing Well. Other short story collections, by King, Poe, of course. The Monkey's Paw, I would say, is one that could be explored. The Picture of Dorian Gray. I think that'd be a good one as far as the writing style, but also just the theme, the idea in The Picture of Dorian Gray.
One last question from me. Some of my favorite parts of these stories were where things start to get manic. You have a lot of rhyming. You do some really creepy things with children's songs. How did you get that manic feeling down so well? Were you referencing books and stories? Were you referencing some of your own experiences? Where did you pull that mania from?
Yeah, so some of these stories do have a little bit of a slow creeping crawl to a crisis, and then as you're kind of alluding to here, when things start to when the water tension breaks, things really get going, and it picks up a lot of speed, and a lot of that is just reflected in human biology. We look at ourselves, if you look at things that trigger us, Some people have a slow escalation to a crisis. Some people have a rapid escalation and an immediate crisis, right? You get right into panic mode. You get into these panic attacks, these anxiety attacks. And what happens when we get into those states is that time seems to change, right? For some people, it's right. Time is relative, as people say, and so when we get into these periods of crisis, all of our physiology is picking up its pace. Your breathing, your heartbeat, your thinking patterns. You get that tunnel vision, and you're just cruising until you get to this crash. And that is what I tried to reflect in some of this writing. I believe I'm hopeful that it comes across that way.
Oh, it does. It does. It was very manic.
I'm glad to hear. I suppose I'm glad to hear that that's the response anyway. That's the feeling that people get. If you do, if you enjoy the work, you enjoy the way it made you feel, please make that known online.
Leave reviews.
Be vocal about it. If you hated it, you absolutely couldn't stand it. You think that I shouldn't make content anymore. You got to write a nasty letter about it and send it in. You know what? I do not fear that kind of criticism. So if you want to write your state representation telling them that I should not be making content anymore, you will need my legal name, okay? So when you're writing that in, know that my name is Jared Leto. That is Leto, Leto. And you write in and you say, stop making content. And so just keep that in mind. Otherwise, if you love it and you wanna praise it online, Christopher Ruiz, that's my pen name, Christopher Ruiz. But the legal name for the criticisms, please, Jared Leto.
And also note that we are in the state of Illinois, which has a ban on book bans. So
Indeed.
This book is going to be available as an ebook, paperback, and hardcover, and will eventually be, I believe, an Audible exclusive when the audiobook is released.
Yes. Likely we're looking at probably a mid-December timeline for the audiobook. It should be available on Audible, hopefully by the end of the year.
All right. You can find this book on Amazon and at christopher-ruiz.com as of Sunday. Possibly Monday for your personal website, because we do have the book launch that evening. And books on the personal site will be signed copies. You can also get it signed by myself, the illustrator and designer. If you so wish, there will be an option for that. Otherwise, find the book on Amazon. Leave a review everywhere that you review things, because indie authors need those voices. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for your time.